Buenos días o buenas noches. Vamos a esperar un poquitito a que se traten de loguear todos. Ahí estamos. Estamos un poquito atrasados. Ahí, bien. Muy bien. Mi nombre es Martín Soriano y les quiero decir que esta charla cuenta con interpretación simultánea, ya que tenemos varios intérpretes que tienen una combinación lingüística distinta a mi idioma A, que obviamente es el castellano. O a veces voy a decir español en vez de castellano para que se entienda mejor, ya que donde digo castellano a veces la L me vende como si fuese un argentino rioplatense, que lo soy, aunque por pasaporte les aclaro que mi familia es catalana, pero mi acento es 100% argentino. Tenemos tres intérpretes hoy. Uno al inglés, que es Rafael Gunner, que es un intérprete fenomenal que seguro me va a estar traduciendo muy bien. Y luego van a poder escuchar, para aquellos que no entienden inglés, la traducción a través del idioma castellano en el icono de interpretación de Zoom. Ahí van a escuchar a Tatiana y a una alumna mía de tercero que se llama Valeria. Así que están en muy buenas manos, audiencia. Para los que van a escuchar directamente a David, van a disfrutar seguramente de su charla. ¿Okay? Van a poder ver los ejemplos que él va a poner sobre su disertación, sobre lo que es la interpretación consecutiva. Ahora, si no poníamos interpretación simultánea en este seminario, era como dice el proverbio, ¿no? En casa de herrero, cuchillo de palo, pero no. Especialmente habilitamos entonces la interpretación para que pudieran participar todos aquellos intérpretes del portugués, de chino y también de otros idiomas. Aún los intérpretes de lenguaje de señas que se han sumado a este encuentro a último momento. Ahora sí, en nombre del Instituto Argentino entonces de Traducción e Interpretación, me gustaría darles la bienvenida a esta serie de webinars que organizamos ahora en noviembre para hablar sobre interpretación de conferencias, consecutiva y simultánea. Tanto David como yo tomamos la capacitación de conferencias muy seriamente. Se nota la dedicación que le ponemos a los cursos, a innovar con material, metodología, para poder transmitirles a los alumnos, que muchos ya son intérpretes profesionales, porque en el caso de David le dicta clases a muchos intérpretes médicos o de tribunales que quieren incursionar luego en lo que es la interpretación de conferencias. Recuerden que la próxima charla es el martes próximo, 23 de noviembre, y ahí voy a estar yo, de orador, en esta oportunidad. Vamos a estar explicando estrategias usadas a menudo en interpretación simultánea, en base a una investigación que vengo realizando hace varios años ya. El link de las charlas lo van a recibir mañana por email. También les comento que estamos lanzando los cursos de verano. Bueno, el verano aquí en Sudamérica o el invierno de Estados Unidos y Europa, ¿no? Son cursos introductorios o intensivos y también cursos para intérpretes que buscan adquirir o mejorar su español C. Los cursos los pueden ver luego en el link del instituto, que es www.interprete.com.ar. Recuerden que siempre, como estamos en Argentina, lo que va a ser el dominio va a ser .com.ar. En el caso de David, no, va a ser davidviolet.com. Ahora sí vamos a presentar al orador. David tiene una vasta trayectoria, vive actualmente en la ciudad de San Francisco, en California. Fue profesor de la Escuela de Monterrey desde el 2006 al 2008. Actualmente conocida como Middlebury. Es miembro de ahí hace varios años, estudió en la SIT con gente muy prestigiosa. De hecho, profesores de ahí han escrito investigación de gran trascendencia, como Danica Seleskovich, Christopher Theory y varios otros. Seguramente han leído algo de esa investigación. Ahora, desde 1987, David ha trabajado como intérprete para el Departamento de Estado, para la OEA, Corte Criminal Internacional en La Haya, Parlamento Europeo, Tribunal de Justicia. A ver, lo tengo anotado acá. OTAN, OCDE, UNESCO, la primera oficina del ministro de Kosovo, Misión de Mantenimiento de Paz para Naciones Unidas en Ruanda, Angola y Kosovo. No me lo iba a acordar seguramente eso. Vamos a enviarles también un PDF con la presentación de David. Entonces, les voy a pedir que para los que quieran suscribirse a un curso que él está dictando sobre lo que es Note-Taking for Consecutive Interpreting. Van a poder escribir el código que les pongo ahí en el chat para aquellos que estén interesados tanto para recibir el PDF de la presentación. Existe un cupón de descuento más o menos del 30% para este curso, y también vamos a explicarles que el curso de consecutiva de David, que son clases pregrabadas, tiene 20 módulos explicados en detalle sobre lo que es la interpretación consecutiva, y un link también de un mini curso sobre simbología utilizada en la interpretación consecutiva. Así que bueno, el email ya se los copié ahí, es david@davidviolet.com. El código se llama Glance Out. Obviamente por sus palabras en inglés, se explica por sí mismo, porque al ver la hoja donde uno toma notas, ya se puede ubicar fácilmente en el flujo de la información necesaria para poder realizar organizadamente una interpretación consecutiva. Yo igualmente también le voy a pasar, para los que no se olvidan de pasar el email, le voy a pasar el listado de asistencias al webinar para que les pueda enviar un email con la información de la charla, ¿ok? Y de los cursos. Así que bueno, David, todo tuyo, y te presentamos ahora para que puedas seguir con tu charla, ¿ok? Un gusto.
Okay, let's check. Can you hear me okay? I'm going to assume that yes, so it's not working. So greetings, colleagues, and welcome to this talk on note-taking for consecutive interpreting. I'm going to cover several topics, actually, along with note-taking for consecutive interpreting. Let me share my screen. Let's see how that goes. So,
te vemos bien.
Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I haven't had the pleasure to meet you yet. My name is David Violet. I am a conference interpreter and conference trainer in San Francisco, California area, and a member of AIC. I think that Martin has already given me a pretty good introduction. And so we are going to be talking today about note-taking for consecutive, but I'm also going to give a little context. I'm going to give a little bit of history, and I'm going to, at the end, we will have an exercise in note-taking for consecutive interpreting. So please do bring your notebook and something to write. I first want to say that I get it. You are interpreters. You want to be, I have a few preliminary remarks before we start with the 4 parts of our session. I know that you want to do good consecutive interpreting. You want to the speaker to say, as a British speaker once said to me at the European Parliament, hey, you did that better than I did. You want to be in high demand because you are known for beautiful consecutive. You want to charge a top price for it because they know you are quality. And you want to bring home more days. You want to bring home more income for your family. I get it. That's what we want. We want to be excellent interpreters. We want to be successful. So we will be looking at consecutive with notes. I will not lie. The skill of doing good consecutive with notes takes hundreds of hours of practice. But that practice will be much better, much more efficient if you do use a good method. And today, I'm going to concentrate on a specific aspect of the method. There are many things to be learned from about the method of writing notes and the whole process of consecutive interpreting. And today, I will go into much of what we write on the page. And we will be talking a lot about this part in the green there, the part about the layout, what I'm calling the glance layout. Why glance? Because we want to be able to look at our paper in a glance, to look at the paper and catch the idea, remember what was said, and say it. So as I said earlier, I will ask you to have a notepad and a pencil ready, and we will be doing an exercise. And a little note about myself. I'd like to read something from one of my students who said it was probably the most complimentary thing I've ever gotten. And to be honest, I've never actually gotten anything bad from those who have taken my course. I learned so much about note-taking through your online class that in 1 year, more than in 1 year conference interpreting study at a major European conference capital. In my opinion, this detailed course on note-taking should be part of all university courses in conference interpreting. Well, I have to say that I learned how to do conference interpreting at AZ, as Martin kindly said in his introduction, and it was pretty much sink or swim. I'll tell you, we had to pick up things here and there, beg from each teacher, find out from the people who were in the class before us, etc. So I'm not surprised that in my class you learn more, at least as far as techniques, than you would at many of these university programs. Please do stay until the end. I will be teaching some truly valuable stuff. That's a promise. And I will tell you also how, from now until Friday, you can get a coupon for a 30% reduction on that course, the 20-module course on note-taking for consecutive interpreting. It's 5 hours of video and 25 exercises, etc. So let's now take a look at what we are talking about. We are going to be looking at, let me see if I got this right. Yes. Here you have a video that shows notes being taken on the basis of the text that is up in the upper right. And this is a video of what we are going to do in about half an hour when I've explained a few of the concepts and we've looked at the note taking. We will take a look at what each of those pieces of notes means and why it is placed where it is on the page. But as I said, okay, so I'm finishing my preliminary remarks. Now I'm going to go on to the main organization of this talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about my career path first, then a little history of consecutive, actually history of conference interpretation. Number 3, why should we all learn consecutive? And when I say consecutive, I mean with notes. I started hearing this term short consecutive recently. For me, all through my career, consecutive has meant with notes and for periods of time that go from 5 to 10 minutes or more, as we shall see, maybe even an hour. And number 4, that's when we start digging in to the note-taking techniques. So let's take a look. My career path. I started after I did my studies. I was in Paris from 1986 to 1988. I worked as a freelance interpreter there. Then I went to Washington, D.C., 1988 to 1994, worked as freelance there. And I was not all that hot on Washington, D.C., to be honest, in those days. And I accepted a job in peacekeeping with the United Nations peacekeeping. And I worked in 1994 in Rwanda, and then for 4 years, 94 to 99 in Angola, and then in Kosovo for about 1 year. And then I returned back to Paris for 5 years, where I worked as a conference interpreter. And thank goodness at that point, I joined AIC for many good reasons. I believe in AIC. I believe that to be an interpreter, it's good to be part of the group of people who are interpreters. Of course, there are many other good associations as well as AIC, but I encourage you to join. I say thank goodness also because somebody that I knew from Washington, D.C. from years before called me when I was in Paris, and she was working at The Hague, and she had me come up to do their conference of states parties. And somebody that day asked me, hey, are you free next week? And one thing led to another, and I ended up spending a year as a staff conference interpreter and translator at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. From The Hague, that was 2005 to 2006. From there, I went to Monterey, at that time, it was still called the Monterey Institute of International Studies. Now it's Middlebury, sorry. And from there, from 2006 to 2008, I taught as a professor of interpretation. And then I did a little sabbatical, lo and behold, there in beautiful Buenos Aires for about, actually it was about 5 years, just a few. And now, yeah, right, when I went, my father passed away actually in 2012, and I came back to San Francisco, and I've been here ever since 2001, working as a freelance interpreter. Just a few little pictures of those days. Many people, have you ever seen a shop where they actually, the first dollar, they put it in a frame where, well, I've put this, you know, the first dollar they put in the cash register, sometimes they will put it on the wall where, well, I have on the wall my first assignment with the European Economic Communities. That's when I was living in Paris. And that was in 1987. And I have that on the wall. In those, I was working for the European Parliament a lot because I was lucky. I had Portuguese as a language, and Portugal had just joined the European Union, actually the European Economic Communities as it was called back then. So here's a picture of my period in Washington, DC. In peacekeeping, this is something you might see if you are in peacekeeping, and I encourage you, there are all kinds of possibilities in peacekeeping. It can be quite fun, also quite dangerous, to tell you the truth sometimes. I was evacuated from Kigali, Rwanda in April 1994. That was as the crisis was erupting right before us. And then I traveled around with the special representative of the Secretary General to various places to try to get support for our mission. That's a picture of me interpreting for the president of Ghana and the special envoy of the Secretary General of the United Nations there in Ghana. Here is Force Commander Romeo Dallaire going back to Kigali, and I am there as interpreter. We were going back for ceasefire talks in June 1994. This is a picture of me interpreting for the head of the UN in Angola, Alioune Blondin Bey, who was leading that mission, and he's there talking to the press. And then, as I said, I went to Kosovo, and there's Kosovo, that little province it was back then, and now it is a country, and I worked there, and I actually, as I was saying, I ended up getting called to do all kinds of things as interpreter. I ended up being special assistant to a high official, and I actually ended up being the mayor. My title was municipal administrator, but I was the mayor of 2 cities in Kosovo. And actually in that capacity, Glagovac and Porjevo. And in that capacity, I actually performed the first marriage in Kosovo since the war. And let me see if I can pull up this little spotlight thing. That's me in the picture. And that was my interpreter, Besa. So I worked a lot with an interpreter because I didn't know how to speak Albanian or Serbian, etc. So anyway, that's enough about me. Let's talk a little bit about the history of consecutive. We just going back about 1 century, actually, because of course, there have been interpreters and translators all over the world, all down through history, but it started to get formalized, at least in terms that are familiar to us today. After World War I, in 1919, they had peace talks. And at those peace talks, they did not yet have simultaneous interpretation. They had consecutive. And they were able to do pieces of 1 hour. In other words, somebody would speak for an hour, and interpreter would take it all down in the notes and would reproduce that speech actually in less than an hour. That's something we discuss more in my main course. So anyway, so that's how it started going, how we could say conference interpreters started being called conference interpreting. Then but it was in consecutive, right? This blue line is showing us the consecutive. And then simultaneous started going, actually the very first time that there was a serious try, it seems, was at the International Labor Organization in 1927. We have some simultaneous, but it was, of course, the Nuremberg trials that really got it going. You had several languages, Russian, German, French, and English. And can you imagine if you speak and then everybody has to wait for all three consecutives before you could get the trial going? So anyway, that's where simultaneous became, and electronics had caught up as well. So they were going through a crisis, not totally unlike the crisis, or at least the transformation that we now see with remote. So the simultaneous got going, and it was used at the first United Nations General Assembly in 1946. And AIC was created in 1953 as a group of conference interpreters. Here is an image of Versailles, where they were having that conference for the peace talks after World War I. And here we see, I'm going to show you a few pictures. This is the courthouse for the Nuremberg trial. And you can see at the back of the room, there are the interpreters in what were in those days the booths. And here there is a close-up of them. And you can see she's actually quite close to the prosecutor and the witness to her left. Anyway, so these are some interesting pictures. And we've seen that simultaneous, of course, has now become something quite advanced. But of course, it has also been transformed into something that we all know. And that's not exactly my setup, but mine is quite similar to that. So that was a quick overview of the history of conference interpreting. Now, let me talk a little bit about why we, as interpreters, we all need to learn consecutive interpreting. I'm going to say that there are three main reasons. You need to be able to do consecutive, to take any of these qualification examinations at major institutions, the United Nations, the Organization of American States, etc. Whether you are trying for a staff position or whether you would like to be on their roster of freelance interpreters, generally speaking, you will have to do a good consecutive, probably about 5 to 8 minutes long. B, there are so many situations where it's actually planned to do a good consecutive. It's more of a ceremonial thing, or they don't have a situation where they have equipment. We'll take a look at that. And C, pedagogical. There are good pedagogical reasons to learn consecutive interpreting. So as I was saying, qualification exams for the United Nations, Pan American Health Organization, international or local courts, or your own foreign affairs ministry probably requires you to be able to do a good piece of consecutive in order to be on their roster of interpreters. Many situations are like this one. They don't have equipment in the back of the room, or maybe it's just a half an hour meeting with a speech, and they're not going to set up booths in the back of the room. They're just going to have a speaker, and you will be standing somewhere near this person, or perhaps sitting, and then you will stand up and give that speech in another language. So that kind of thing will happen all the time. You might be next to this guy who's giving his speech, and then he will stop and you will step up and do perhaps 5 8-minute pieces at a time, perhaps the whole thing. Consecutive is very much a ceremonial type of thing. Sometimes people want a consecutive to be part of the performance, if you will, the show. So they have somebody giving a talk, giving a beautiful speech, and then the interpreter, who of course is all dressed up for the occasion as well, stands up and does an interpretation. Let's say two families, people from two different families are getting married. You might have a speech by the best man or something, and that would be put into another language. That's happened to me. I actually interpreted for a colleague who got married, and there was one family was French and the other family was American. It's part of the fun, part of the show, if you will, and it would not work the same with simultaneous. You can be also in many situations, factories or fields. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a situation very similar to that, where French farmers have come to take a look at California agriculture, and we are walking around the field with them. Or in a place like this where suddenly the equipment stops working and they say, well, I guess the interpreter has to come to the front of the room and do the interpretation. Or they may say, okay, everybody, now we will break into two groups, one group will go over to that room over there in another part of, say, the hotel, and the other group will stay here. Well, in that other room, there's no equipment, so that you'll be asked to step out of the booth and do the consecutive in the other room. Of course, court interpreting is also one of the major areas where you will need to do very good, precise consecutive interpreting. Now, I also said as the third reason to learn consecutive, the pedagogy. Let me see if I can tell you about that. When we are working, of course, as amateurs, right? We all know people who say, oh, you go from word to word. They think that we're doing transliteration, right? Many people think that, well, if I hear table in English, I just say table in French, and that's all there is to it. Well, no. What happens, as all of us know, we are all trained interpreters, we hear something, we then understand what it means, and that's what I'm trying to illustrate here. 1145 are 3 words. When the interpreter, who happens to be me, sees that this is a time of day, the interpreter spontaneously converts it into an idea, into knowledge, de-verbalizes it. And then the interpreter takes it and is going to put that idea in the other person's mind in completely different words. Of course, they're different words because it's a different language. I picked words in English, so it would be understandable to an English-speaking audience. 15 minutes to 12, it has nothing to do, none of the original words, but it does convey the same idea. So this whole concept, which I know that all of you know as interpreters, is something that is reinforced when we do consecutive. And the reason is that, okay, in simultaneous, we are saying something like we said earlier, table, table, maybe 8 seconds later. And when we're doing a consecutive without notes, it might be a little longer. It might be whatever, 20. But when we are doing consecutive, we end up having to express what we understood several minutes later. And this gives us the time to get a little distance between ourselves and the original form, and to actually be able to separate the two. I have a little anecdote about that, which is that there was a time when the French were asking the Americans in 1830 to help them with something. And in French, they used the word demande, and it sounds like demand, right? Demande, but it's a faux ami, right? Demande is just ask or request, or yeah, to request. And apparently the translator back in 1830 did not do this process we're talking about, did the direct transliteration and said demand. And President Jackson, who was president in those days, said, if the French dare to demand anything, they will get nothing at all. So that's just a little anecdote about how these faux amis, these false cognates, this can trip us up. And consecutive is a way to train, especially young or beginning interpreters, how to go through this process of understanding the meaning and then putting it in the target language. So now let's take a look at what I promised you earlier. We are going to look at note-taking techniques, consecutive with notes. And as I said, we are going to focus on the actual layout, the layout of the page. And what I would like to do is convince you of something. That layout is very important. Let's say when we are writing in this text, I'm going to show you something where, there's no layout, there's no structure, there's no, the space has no meaning. It's just a flow of text, and it has no shape. It has the spaces on the page do not convey any meaning. They don't help you. There's nothing there. So let's take a look at a couple of tasks that people perform, that people have to do, where they use paper the way we do in our consecutive for a different reason. And they have specific layouts for that reason. First, let's say we have our accountant, and the accountant is at a meeting. And the chairman of the meeting says, hello, yes, we need our accountant now to tell us about the treasury stock at cost. Well, the accountant has his document in a very specific layout with all the numbers on the right and everything divided into assets and liabilities and all of the headings right here. So she's able to say, okay, I think I can find that in an instant. It's got to be down here because it's a liability, and I believe it's down here by the treasury. Here it is. And then she can say 1817 because of the layout. If she had had the layout we saw earlier, it would be lost in a bunch of words. Let's take another example, a cook. A cook is going to need a specific layout. The cook is going to say, okay, what do we need? I'm going to go to the store and get these, or maybe we have it already. What do we need? So it's all in the quantities are listed, the items are listed, and then when it's time to actually do the cooking, the various tasks that need to be carried out or over here in a description. So we see that for this specific task, there is a layout that's designed for that task. Now, what would you say? I like to say that the process of interpreting is a little bit like driving a car because we have to go fast. This fast pace is often uncomfortable. And I often make the comparison that if you don't hear something, then you are in serious trouble and basically you have a crash. So I often compare our task to that of a driver. And sadly, I think that I forgot to put the sound on. See if I can do it now. Maybe you'll be able to hear this. So I'm going to say that we are a lot like this driver.
Whenever or wherever a few seek to threaten those who look, or wherever a few seek to threaten those who look, dress, or wherever a few seek to threaten those who look, dress, or pray differently, the others stand up and say, no, not here, not in our community, not to our neighbors. Time after time, and tolerance rears its ugly head, and idiots rise up, these literally open their doors.
I don't know if any of you feel a little bit like that's what we do, but you know, we are often in a situation where we are asked to go at top speed and someone else is imposing this speed on us and we're barely able to make it around each corner. Now, when that driver is looking around the corner, he looks at the speedometer and he goes, okay, I want to know exactly how fast I'm going. So in English, we would have miles per hour. And he looks at the dial, boom, in a glance says, okay, I got the right speed for this corner. But what if the next time he looks, it's like that? And he looks down and it's not in the right place. That's going to be a problem. You can see how for each task, we need to have a layout, and we need to have a layout where it's permanent. You can't have the dashboard changing around on you, right? Okay, another example. When we have a letter, everyone knows this task. We have information on the letter. Let's say that the postman gets this letter and sees this and says, okay, I think I can figure this out. The sender is this person here, and the recipient is that person there. Of course, a real postmaster is going to probably say, forget it. This is not the right format. This is not the right layout. And I'm just going to, I don't know what to do with this. I guess I'll send it back. No, it should be like that, right? So the postmaster looks and goes, okay, this is going there, and it's from that person. I know immediately, in one instant, in one glance, I can tell where this letter is supposed to go. And we don't want that changing around. If it changes, then everything is going to be off. So we want something that is permanent. Otherwise, in the case of the letter, of course, it will go to the wrong place. So let's take a look at what we as interpreters are doing. So we have the letter and the recipe and the accountants, they have their formats. What would our format be? Okay, that is what we're going to dig into a little bit now. We're going to look at a text. It says we have a text here, which is, I'll read it out to you. A dog had, this is an Aesop fable, which you may recognize. A dog had a delicious piece of meat in its mouth. As he crossed a river on a bridge, he saw below the below him the reflection of a dog with meat in its mouth. He tried to grab that meat in its teeth, but only got water. And the real meat fell and sank to the bottom and was gone. And the dog remained hungry. Okay, we have a simple information here, several ideas. And let's say we are trying, but it's not organized in any way. It's like I said earlier, it's just going to the right, and when it hits the end of the page, it goes back to the left. But what we would like to be able to find is who's doing all these things. So here we are, we can find the various subjects of the sentences, but look, they're all over the place. They are off to the left and off to the right. There's no rhyme or reason. Or maybe we want to know what is happening. What is the action? So we would look at the verbs. We got the various verbs here that are, oh, what do you know? They're all over the place. No rhyme or reason. So that's not good. To write out notes in the usual way the text is written is not going to be satisfactory. So that's bringing us back to our glance layout. And as I said earlier, and as Martin said earlier kindly as well, if you would like to get a discount, a 30% discount on my 20 module course on note-taking, just send glance layout to my email right there, david@davidviolet.com. And I will also send you a link to a free course on symbols. Now, this glance layout that I'm about to tell you about is not something that I made up. It's something that I was taught after begging and after a lot of work actually at ESIT, but I was taught this by these two greats, Danica Celeckovic and Christopher Thierry. I found pictures of Christopher on the internet, but I thought, why not show one of me? I happened to be at a meeting with him in 2019 in Paris, so there I am with Christopher Thierry. I would also like to give credit to Andrew Gillies, who has a book about this note-taking for consecutive. It's an excellent book. I highly recommend it. So this is sort of to tell you, this is not something I made up. It's something that is taught all around. And you've probably, most of you already know this. I hope it will be a good review though in that case. So I'm going to first show you 6 layout elements. Number 1 is you break the message into ideas. So a complex thing, any complex task, is best managed when you break it up into manageable parts. So that's the idea here. You want to break the message into parts, and we call these parts ideas. Then you want to put a line under each idea. You put a line under the idea because I have seen students who have pretty good note-taking, but they tend to forget this separating the ideas from each other, and it's just one long flow, and you're overcoming you're defeating the object of this idea of chunking. You want to have it in manageable parts. So number 2, you put in a horizontal line under each idea. Number 3, you have links. If there are logical links, you will try to put those in to reconnect these ideas that have been chunked and separated by a horizontal line. And then number 4, the SVO units. Of course, SVO stands for subject, verb, object. So that's pretty self-explanatory. We will be digging into that a little bit. And these SVO units will be put into virtual columns. See, by virtual, we mean they are not written on the page. They're just mental and organized, sort of like the columns for the accountant earlier, who had all the numbers organized in columns. And then we do diagonal writing. Instead of writing straight across the page where everything will be very crowded and look, it'll end up being just one big block of text, we go down as we go across. And we'll take a look at this a little bit more. Here we go. Look, another Aesop fable. The grasshopper played his fiddle, so he had no food. The ants gathered food. They stored a large amount because they feared the cold winter. This is the tale of the grasshopper and the ants, right? And I want to show you how you might be able to put this on the page according to what I've just described. So we started out with, actually, it's in parentheses because this is on, we're going to say this is on the page before. This is on the page before, but it's helped. I'm putting it there because it shows there's a logical link here. The grasshopper played his fiddle and therefore had no food. So in our notes, that's on the preceding page. And so he had no food. So here we have the SVO going down the page. There we have the horizontal line, and the ants gathered food. The ants gathered food. Horizontal line. They stored a large amount. Because, what do you know? We have another logical link, just like that one over there. A logical link. Because they feared the cold winter. They feared the cold winter. So we see all of the elements here, the break the message into parts, horizontal line, the links, the SVO units, virtual columns. Now I'm going to take a look at each one a little more closely for those of you who have never seen this before, maybe. Looking at breaking the message into ideas, which I mentioned. That's going to be these lines. Here is an idea there, and there's an idea there. So, okay, this is what I mean by idea. It's going to be an area of the page. It's going to be a rectangle, and it's going to be closed off with this line at the bottom. So that's how we finish the idea, and that's where the horizontal line comes in. So here's where the horizontal line is. The first one's going to be over here, right? And the next one will be down here. So each of these ideas need to be closed off with a line at the bottom. And then the links, we mentioned those, and I sort of explained as we went, right? The grasshopper played his fiddles, and therefore he didn't have any food, right? So, but the ants, they were gathering a lot of food because they feared the cold winter. So these are our two links, at least in this example. And then we go on to the SVO units. We can see where those are. These are these subject, verb, object, subject, verb, object, subject, verb, object, subject, verb, object. In this case, we have 4 groups of SVO. And then the virtual columns. Now, you see how sort of like the accountant, we have the subjects all lined up, and the verbs are all lined up, and the objects are all lined up on both sides of the paper. I will add that, you know, this line down the middle is not absolutely necessary. There are some people who teach not to have that line, but to just use the whole width of the page. But this is how I was taught, and I continue to do it that way, and I continue to teach that way. And then we said the diagonal writing, right? So you want to be going down as you go across the page, going down as you go across the page. Now, we're going to do an exercise pretty soon, and I'm going to teach you a couple of other things that will help a lot with this exercise. And that is, one is the recall line. What does that mean? It means that if you've already written something on the page, you shouldn't have to write it again. So for example, in our example here, we did write the ants once, right? Remember, these are not the actual notes, right? These are just, this is a skeleton, it's a template. Now I'm actually putting in a note. The ants gathered food, and we have written it here. And now up here, we're going to say the ants, what was it again? They gathered, they stored a large amount, right? Well, we can just write this line rather than write ants again, because they feared the ants, because the ants feared the cold winter. So the recall line is a way to draw a line to the preceding instance when something was said, to avoid having to write it again. And it's actually better, not only because you don't have to write it again and it's faster, but because it also tells you, hey, this is something that's already come up. You may want to keep that in mind. And then, so that's for the recall line. Now, the next thing, the way I indicate the tense in note-taking is when it's the past tense, there is a little line on the left. When it is the present tense, there is a little line straight above. And when it is the future, it's off to the right like that. So here we have everything in the past tense, right? So it's he played his fiddle, etc. It's all in the past tense. So we've got the line on the right. Okay, now I would like to do an exercise. We have already seen this text, and I've asked you to please get out your piece of paper. I would like to ask you to get out your tablet of paper and your pen. And as I read this again, please take notes any way that you do. Take them the way that you normally do, or you can try to incorporate these ideas if you like, okay? I'm going to read it right now. Grab your pen, and I hope everyone is ready with their pen. Sometimes I use the chat to see if everybody's ready, but actually I think our chat would have been kind of nice to, oh well. So
David, ya está habilitado el chat, yes?
Yeah, it is,
Chat.
okay.
They can use it, yeah? They can use it.
Okay, let's see, but my chat is only for hosts and panelists. Anyways, is everybody there? Can you just write in the chat, hey, I'm here. I sort of feel like I'm talking to the wall for now. If you know what I mean. I'm sure you have. Hey, lovely, thank you, lovely, lovely. Oh, wow, so awesome. Great to get feedback, thanks. Oh, perfect. Patricia, Emily, Olivia, Tony, George, fantastic. I see some of the people who come to my weekly practices. Thank you for coming, it's an honor. Okay, well, let's do this, good. It's just, can't tell you how nice it is, because I can't see you anyway, either. So this is it. You're going to write notes, okay? A dog had a delicious piece of meat in its mouth. And as he crossed a river on a bridge, he saw below the reflection of a dog with meat in its mouth. He tried to grab that meat in its teeth and only got water. The real meat fell and sank and was gone. So the dog remained hungry. Okay, so now you have written some notes on the basis of that very short story. Let's take a look at how that might be portrayed. This is my application of what I have tried to tell you today, and I'm not saying this is perfect, and I'm not saying this is the only way, but it does illustrate what I'm trying to say. So we're going to look at all 6 of these things, and we're going to see how we can apply that to this. So I'm going to start with dog. It's a 3-letter word. Why not? It's the subject of the sentence, and it's not long enough to be a problem. I'm going to use the verb also as a 3-letter word. It's very short, and I'm indicating the past tense. And I have meat. It's a 4-letter word. Okay, it's a little bit starting to get a little bit long, but not bad. And it was a delicious piece of meat. I teach that to emphasize something, you can underline it. So you could say a delicious piece of meat by underlining the meat. Remember, we are speaking largely from memory, and the notes are there to jog our memory. Sometimes they tell us something we don't remember, for example, a long number. But by underlining here, we should remember that this is to emphasize that it's a great piece of meat. It's a delicious piece of meat. Next, and we say to say in the mouth, okay, this is getting pretty detailed. I sometimes recommend using this slash to say that there is a relationship which would normally be expressed by a preposition or a prepositional phrase. So meat in his mouth. MTH seems to be, you might not even need these because a dog has to have meat in its mouth. So you might not even need that at all. Okay, so, and we close it off with a horizontal line. And then I started with this as, because I saw that as a transition or as a logical link or a temporal link. As he crossed a river, now I'm using the recall line, as he, right? So we don't want to say it again. We're going to just use the line to make it easier. As he crossed a river on a bridge. Cross. Okay, it's a 5-letter word now, getting a little bit long, but that's okay. I have it in the past tense. I always indicate the tense. And I have a little dash here. I'll explain that in a minute. The river. This is a way where you can do abbreviations, which is quite nice. You got the first 3 letters and the last letter in a superscript. Remember, you are visualizing all this, right? We, depending on what's being said, you visualize, you use all the techniques any normal person would use to remember something or to listen to something. So with this abbreviation and with the fact that you've visualized this dog crossing a river, you will remember that that's a river over a bridge. Okay, the same thing. You've seen it in your mind already, and the dog. Okay, we have the same subject. What do you know? So we have the same subject, which happens to be the subject from the idea before, having 2 verbs. And since these are both in the same column, they are playing the same role, I'm saying that they are part of the same group, and therefore they are part of a list. You know, you could say the dog crossed, he saw, and then he jumped, and you could have a list of verbs. Note, of course, that they are all in the middle. So this is how I wrote saw. And reflection, the same principle as here. First 3 letters, last letter in superscript. He saw reflection. Oh, what do you know? Of the meat. We already had that. So he saw the reflection of the meat. And we see, and we close with a horizontal line. So we have a logical link. So this is the interpreter adding this, actually. He saw the meat, so he tried to grab it. The text doesn't say that. But in my opinion, you are free to add that because it is a consequence of him seeing the meat. It's a consequence of him seeing the meat is that he tried to get the meat. So this is going to help you. It doesn't matter that the speaker didn't actually say that. So what do you know? The dog, again, same subject. So we're just going to have a recall line. Try, we have this nice 3-letter word with the past tense. Tried to bite, a 4-letter word. We got 2 verbs, both in the verb column here. And tried to bite. What do you know? He tried to bite the reflection, actually. So we have a line going up to the reflection. He actually tried to bite the meat, but the interpreter knows that it's only the reflection of the meat. So he's making it more clearer to himself what is understood by any listener. But, so he tried to bite the reflection of the meat, but it was just water. Sometimes I teach just to do notes like this, where it's obvious enough that what's going on. You don't need to write, it was just water. I've got water with an exclamation point to say that this was a surprise, that this was a bad. For in chess, actually, an exclamation point is a good move, but it doesn't matter. Next idea, meat, the real meat fell and sank and was gone. The real meat, so we're doing a recall line again to say that's the meat. This is not a recall line, it's an arrow. It's an arrow with the tense indicated. Fell. If something goes down, it's falling. So this is the meat fell. Where did it fall? It fell in the water. We already have water, so we're using a recall line to say that the meat fell into the water. Oh, what do you know? 2 verbs. It fell into the water and it disappeared. It was gone. I'm using gone as a verb even though this is not a verb. Well, it's a past participle, but it is a lot shorter than disappeared. And if I put gone over here as a past participle or something, it would not be as clear that there are 2 things that happen. We have 2 things in the verb column. It falls and actually, I don't have sink. So that's something that the interpreter would have to explain, and it probably would have been better to actually have all 3 verbs that fell, sank, and was gone. End. And therefore, this is a cause and effect again, and therefore, the dog, we're referring to the dog again, the dog remained hungry, but remains kind of long. So we're using stay. The dog stayed hungry. Same method. First 3 letters of a word. It's actually the first 1, 2, 3 or 4 letters, and the last letter or 2 or so in superscript. To generally will give you the feel of a word that you've already heard, and it's just there to jog your memory. So we have gone through that, and at this point, I might probably ask if there are any questions, but
Yes, there are.
yeah, let's hear. Yeah.
There's one question by Ana Cecilia asking, do you indicate past tense even with short verbs such as sat, saw, or had?
I do. I just developed that habit because it's just a bing with your pen, and it's so fast that there are times actually when I skip it, but when I do skip it, it's usually because it's the present, and therefore it's sort of seen as having no tense or sort of. So yeah, it doesn't matter how short the verb is to me. It's whether or not it's important and whether or not I think I'll remember it. But rather than ask myself all the time, am I going to remember this? Usually I just throw it in there. We got more? You have any more questions?
No, no further questions.
Okay.
Are there any questions? You can type them in the Q&A, and I can later translate the questions if it's in Spanish into English, or tell David, okay, to take them. Go ahead, Dave.
So that's where that's how I wrote these according to the method that I just tried to explain. Let me go through now about how it could be dissected, why I used each area of the page the way I did. So the first part of our 6 elements, right, is break the message into ideas. And we did that. We got the idea there. The second idea was there. The third idea was down there. This is counted as a 4th idea, although you could say it's part of that idea. Another idea here. And the last idea is there. So it's broken into ideas. Next, the horizontal line. We've got that, right? We've got after each idea, we've got the horizontal line going in there and closing off each idea. Now, as far as the links, we used quite a bit here. The dog had meat in his mouth, and as he crossed the river on a bridge, he saw the reflection of the meat, and so he tried to bite it, but it was just water, and the real steak fell into the water, so he remained hungry. And then we have our SVO units. I decided to do it this way. You see, it's all done according to this structure, SVO, subject, verb, object. Here we have subject, verb, verb, right? Subject, verb, verb, object, object. So here actually, yeah, we have subject, verb. We have sort of a compound verb here, try to bite. And here we just have the object. Here we have 2 verbs, a subject with 2 verbs. So we do see that it's following the recommended SVO. And then the virtual columns, we have the dog is always the subject in this side of the page. We have the verbs all lined up so that they make sense, and at a glance, we can see what the action is. Here also, we see that the subjects generally refer back to they do refer back to the preceding ideas. We have all of the verbs, when there are some, are in the middle as well. So the virtual columns are illustrated that way. And we do have diagonal writing. As we're going down for each of these ideas, we go not straight across, but down as we write. So that's illustrated as well. So I'm not sure how long I've been speaking. I think I've probably taken up at
There's
least
another question.
my hour. Yeah.
Lisa is asking, can you give any tips to improve memory skills? This is one. And Raphael is asking, do you make a summary in the target language we're interpreting, right?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. When we do consecutive interpreting, I'm not sure if this is what you mean. Consecutive interpreting is not a summary. Consecutive interpreting includes absolutely everything. Everything. No, you leave nothing out. It's the same speech given again in the other language. It includes the register, the style, the numbers, the colors, the intention. You want to give absolutely everything. Now, we are human and we are not perfect. So we may end up leaving things out by mistake. But our goal is to get absolutely everything. Now, sometimes we can see that things like, okay, the interpreter's interpretation is like for 3 people in the room, everybody else is impatient, and those 3 people are already feeling a bit embarrassed because they're taking up so much time. You can maybe sense that people would be happy with something that's a little bit summarized, but generally speaking, in principle, consecutive interpreting is not a summary by any means. And the thing about the memory, well, there are lots of theories about memory. I believe that the most important way to remember something is to really become aware of it in the first place. And that is, there are various tricks to do that. One is, of course, to visualize. These are not tricks. This is the way you listen to things normally. If something is funny, you should notice that it's funny. It should almost make you want to laugh. If it's beautiful, you should notice that it's beautiful. That's what's going to make you remember. The notes, of course, are going to help you a lot, but it's actually the fact that you have taken it in the way somebody, a really attentive person who cares, takes it in. So my recommendation on how to remember things, along with the notes, which actually just jog what should be in your mind, my recommendation is that you've got to listen in a way that really shows that you are totally into it, totally into it. You can't say you don't care. I don't care about this. These are all numbers to me. You've got to be there thinking, what is the trend here? What's going on here? Be part of the meeting. That's how you're going to remember. The more you take in as an active listener, the more you'll be able to remember. Now, there are actual tricks using memory palaces, they're called. There are, well, one of the actual ways to remember that is natural, I think, but very helpful, is to do some kind of association. So if I meet a friend and somebody, and this person is introduced to me as Susan, I might say, well, she doesn't look at all like the Susan I knew in college. If you get something familiar and relate to it, you will be more likely to remember it. And Selezkovich says this in her book, actually. She is at a conference on satellites, and she says, they said that the satellite was 750 kilometers high. And she said, well, I don't know how high that is. Okay, it's the distance from here to Toulouse, to another city, from Paris to Toulouse. So she related it to something rather than leaving it in the abstract. So relating to something, like if somebody's 7 feet tall, you don't want to just write down 7 and keep going. If you can, you want to go, wow, that's probably taller than the tallest person I know. That kind of being there is what's going to help you to remember, I think. I do see some of the questions here in there. Can you provide a link to the recording of the session? Okay, that's for
Yes, I will provide it. There's a question by, please, I will ask the participants to ask questions in the Q&A. Otherwise, it's very difficult to scroll the questions in the chat box that is so small. There's one question that is asked by Magali Lago, says, will the notes be on the source language and then we translate it while we are reading them, or should we, that's what happens with the question, should we take notes
I've got the question.
target language?
Yeah. It's a very common question. We take the notes in any language you want, including symbols or even any language that will work for you. Now, of course, you're looking for a better answer than that in terms of, somebody who seems to know all about this can say, well, it's better to be in the target or the source language. But to be honest, in all my studies, when I was working and as an interpreter during my studies, and also as I worked, I would take notes in whatever came to mind first. Now, the target language does have a slight advantage, right? So if you hear something and the target term pops into your mind, take it. So the main thing is not to waste any time, and that's the purpose behind using symbols, behind using abbreviations. Let me give you an example of an abbreviation. If you have the person says a word that is super long, 12 letters, but you can't think of a symbol, and you can't remember, you can't figure out how to do a good abbreviation. Well, just write the whole thing. Well, all that matters is to save time. So sometimes your hand will just start doing it, just do it. And so in answer to your question, what language, if something comes to your mind first in either the source language or the target language, somehow that's connected with that moment when you heard it. Just write it down. So in my opinion, write down what comes to your mind first. Don't worry about which language. As we said earlier, when I was talking about the advantage, the pedagogical advantage of learning consecutive, we do go through our understanding, right? So your question about, do we write it down in one language and then translate it later? I take that to mean not actually looking at the word later and saying what you think that word is, but looking at the word later, remembering what was going on and what was said and what was referred to, the substance, right? The clock in my example, and then saying that, right? So you're going through your understanding. I hope that helps. More questions?
Question by Irene says that what is the hyphen to the left of the, let me see, of the verb? What is the meaning of the hyphen?
Good question. Good question. I did not explain that. Sorry. And I promised that I would. Whenever I have a list, I put a hyphen to the left. When there are two or more items that line up, I do that because it's a habit from when often you will get a list, right? We'll say, well, we have plenty of products that we produce on our farm. We have apples, oranges, pears, grapes, blah, blah, blah. So they start doing a list, right? And so often these lists are done very fast. And so when the list is going fast, you may miss one. You may have it in your mind because you even see it in your mind, but you just don't have time to write it down. If you have a space holder, that little hyphen. So let's say I have hyphen apple, hyphen orange, hyphen pears, hyphen nothing, hyphen asparagus. So I have this hyphen with nothing. Later, when I get there, I can say, oh, I know what it was because he said it later. It was pineapples. So that is a space holder, and it's a way of reminding myself, there's one here. I didn't have time to write it down, but I hope I'll get it later. So whenever there's something that I see as a list, so for example, here we do have two verbs in a row. It's not so important here, right? Because you're not having a rapid fire list, but it is nice logically to say, okay, the same thing did two things. The same subject did two things in this idea. And having them lined up, okay, you might say that already tells you that, but having the hyphen tells me that it is part of a list, the way I said. And yeah, generally speaking, it would be a list of countries or a list of products or things like that. But good question.
There's another question. How do you try to interpret an oral speech fluently, clearly, faithfully, and accurately without any additions, omissions, distortions, or embellishments?
I think I know who asked that question.
John.
And that's what I was thinking. And the way you need to get all of those items is you need to practice. I mean, of course, you're going to try to write down everything that you can, and you're going to try to organize it like I'm showing you here. But as I said at the beginning, even everything that I'm showing you here, it's sort of like your piano teacher saying, well, these are the black keys, these are the white keys. Those are the pedals. And here you have a score with the notes, the eighth notes, but the rubber hits the road through the hundreds of hours of practice. It's mysterious maybe, but it happens that with this practice, getting constant feedback from your colleagues, or in the absence of a colleague, from some kind of recording and checking it, through that process, you get very good. I mean, you get good at remembering. You just fill yourself up with what the person said, and now you look at the people who really want to hear it, and you really want to tell them. And so you tell them with all that you've taken in. The real thing that you learn when you're practicing is that how to listen as you write. And I really think it's a matter of you through this practice, through getting criticized and being pointed out over and over that you missed this, you missed that, you just develop this ability to remember everything, to care about everything. And you, of course, you know, people should critique you on the register, on the style, on everything, so that you, and on the numbers, you know, if you have a hard time with numbers, everything, you just practice it. And that's my answer. And it does take a lot of practice. Yeah, go ahead.
How can we practice to take notes?
The way to
yes, Juan Obando is asking this question.
Thank you, Juan. The way to practice is to, well, I have a practice group every Friday and Saturday if you want to join us. The way to practice, it's generally speaking, it's with another person who's just like you, an interpreter who wants to learn. You sit down together and either listen to the same recording together, or one will tell the story to the other, and you do these pieces that are 5-8 minutes long or shorter, you know, and start out with very simple things like we did here, very simple. In fact, for the first couple or 3 months, I would just tell stories, depending on how many sessions you can get in. But let's say you get in one session every week. For the first 3 months, keep it very easy. Don't go into high tech or mathematics or anything like that. But then after a few months, start listening to TED Talks or go to all these. You can write to me and ask, the email address has been given, about, there are all kinds of sites that have speeches that are recorded for students, by students, that are perfect for practicing. So that's how I would answer you. And that's how I did it for 2 years. I had specific people who had my languages. I would sit down in a room and we would practice over and over and over. And the feedback needs to be at times a bit tough. You need to, I'm not into pain, believe me, but you need to feel that, damn it, I've got to get this. You need to get this feeling that I don't want to miss it. I want it. I don't like getting criticized. I don't like missing things. And that motivation will, with the work, will make you better. That's my answer.
Dave, Manuela is asking if you can tell her more about the practices on Fridays and Saturdays, please.
Yeah, let me check. Let me continue a little bit with this because I think I have it right after this. I always like to warn colleagues about problems with your hearing. Be very careful. I've lost a little hearing and I have ringing in my ears, probably from being in the booth. And do be very careful with these machines that are hooked up to us, even in a conventional booth. Keep the volume as low as you can and still be able to understand what the person's saying. Okay, that's one of my slides, but I wanted to go on. And there you have a QR code that you can use to get to my page. I have a bunch of articles about that on that page. So right here, I was going to put this in the chat. Let's see if I can do this. For some reason, you know what? I have it in the notes and I forgot to pull it out. I'm going to stop sharing because we've done that.
We can, yeah, we can either copy and paste it in the chat or send them a follow-up email.
Okay. Let me see if I can get out of the, first of all, I'm no longer sharing, and I'm going to get out of the presentation mode of PowerPoint because that gives me access to the notes, because I have those links in the notes and I will put them in the chat. So I was going to do this. Here we go. Copy. Now can I find the chat? Yeah, we have a practice group. Many of the people I've noticed that are here today are coming to the practice group. You can see, yeah, the best is to write to me because there's a Facebook group you see, and there's a LinkedIn group. But if you write to me, I will invite you to our Friday or Saturday groups.
There's another question here. Could you name 3 exercises to practice note-taking for long consecutive?
Well, it's funny. We all say, or a lot of people say, long consecutive. Now, for me, first of all, consecutive always is something that you, consecutive is with notes. Now, it's true that we can do a paragraph by paragraph, and in some situations that is true. As far as exercises, I'll tell you, of course, there are all kinds of exercises that I did in my years. I would memorize pieces of language because that would improve my target language. I would do sight translation, of course. You can translate from one language to the other. You can, of course, you listen to the radio all the time. You can just listen to anything, anywhere, and start writing your notes wherever you are. But basically, I really emphasize the fact that it's a matter of getting down the right technique, which is what I've covered so far is just the bare bones. In the real course, it's 5 hours worth of videos and 25 exercises. And well, you could take my course and see the 25 exercises. That might be one thing you could do if you want to find 3 exercises. Are there any more questions?
No further questions so far. Are there any questions? Please, you can ask them in the Q&A.
These are very common questions, and
there's one here. When is the note-taking course? Can this be taken at any time or must we follow online? I guess you doesn't know that it's pre-recorded by Paula Jimenez.
Yeah, it is pre-recorded, and I haven't given an online live course now for about a year. And I don't know if I'm going to do it again, but maybe I will. But it is pre-recorded, so there's access to that, and I guess I didn't put the link in there. But it's a pre-recorded course that is well, it's like I said, it's 5 hours, so you can take it anytime you want. It's just that you have to go to the website and sign up and pay. I guess I didn't put the link in there. You can go to my YouTube, and under each YouTube there is a description of that. But what I'm going to do is pull up the link to my course. In the meantime, are there some more questions? Any more questions?
No. Oh yes. The course I'm checking online is $395, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And I know that's very high for Latin America. But if you send me an email, I'm going to give you a 30% off.
Are there any other questions? Excellent. I appreciate
There
your
is
tip.
the link to go to my school.
Yes, one here. What is the name of the book for note taking? I think it's Andrew Gillis books.
Yeah,
That you're referring to?
Andrew Gillis wrote a book about note taking, and it's excellent. It's sort of a reference, in my opinion. There's my email. I've just put it in the chat. It goes through what I've just explained. It's quite good. I highly recommend it. Let's see, if you just look for Andrew Gillies, which I've typed in there. If you do a search on Amazon, you'll find his book. He has several books. Oh, darn it, I'm putting it in host only. How do I, sorry about that, everyone. Sorry, I was putting it in the wrong place. I didn't have it in the everyone area.
Yes, we can send you the book by email. Don't worry about it. The name of the book. We can even send the Amazon link.
No, but somebody said, and I'm glad you did, that you don't see it. And so you have my email there, and you have Andrew Gillis's name, which if you look for Amazon that, you can also write me at justdavidviolet@gmail.com. That's my email. And up above in the chat, oh yeah, I didn't put that in the thing either. Sorry about that. Oh. I was putting it in the webinar only area. I mean, the panelists only area.
Other question is, how long does one have access to the course once it's purchased?
Forever. So there's no, you can watch it over and over and over. And now I can't vouch for the platform or whether they have some kind of limits. It's on a platform called Teachable. But as far as I understand, you have access to it for, let's say, at least a year. At least a year.
Can they download those videos? No.
Actually, you mean in the course?
You only. Yes.
There's several people in the attendee list that have taken the course. Maybe they could answer. I don't know whether you can actually download the videos when you can watch them as much over and over as much as you want on the platform.
Good. Well, Dave, I don't think if there are any further questions, we need to wrap up because it's 9:30 here.
Yes, I realize that, and I think I've taken more than my time. I'd just like to thank everybody. I'd like to just say thank you for coming. It's an honor. Try to enjoy your interpreting practices. You can get on things like this and practice at home with somebody on Zoom. That's what I would do. Just do it. Just do it a lot. I'll tell you, I've seen the people in my practice just go from beginners to incredible. But it does take time. It takes a year or so. They're doing it once a week. And some of them are doing it in the university program too. And those people are getting very fast, very good. So thank you, Larissa. Thank you, Nanmei.
There's another one. There's another question. One final question. Do we get a certificate of attendance for having taken this class? No.
The one today? No,
Yeah.
no. When you take mine, you do. You do.
Yeah.
It's good actually for California court credits, but I haven't gotten any other court to certify.
Okay. Okay, thanks for attending. We're going to be organizing another seminar, another webinar that is coming up next Tuesday, and that is going to be on simultaneous, okay? And those are advanced strategies on simultaneous interpreting. So hope to see you next week. And I'm sure that we're going to be organizing another course with David. And David, you said that you're going to be teaching a couple of classes in the summer course, okay? So we're going to see you in the agenda in summertime.
Hey,
okay?
I got to thank the interpreters.
we gotta thank
I got to thank the interpreters.
Tatiana, and especially Rafaela that interpreted the introduction, the first part. Okay.
Thank you very much, interpreters.
And it's a pleasure having you once again. David here. It's great. Okay. Great talk. And we really appreciate it, especially, for people in Argentina who are so far away. Okay.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Right. Bye-bye.